Welcome back, everyone. The next segment is shorter, and it focuses on coding and memos, and then the latter part is more on sort of interpretation, maybe. So in the beginning, with grounded theory and all other parts of qualitative data analysis, it's important to be open to all possibilities in the data. Just try to catch what's there. And in the beginning, stay close to the data. And what is particularly important during your data collection is that you write down detailed descriptions and that you transcribe really detailed from the interviews, word by word, what is said in the interview. Because this is your data. And try to remember to ask people to give you descriptions. Don't ask people why questions, because that very often leads to sort of intellectual sort of analysis of situations, but you need, for your analysis, the description of the situation. So instead of saying, so why do you think that happened? Or why do you think he did that? Then you need to know what happened. Otherwise, you cannot analyze it. Otherwise, you're analyzing other people's speculations. So that's really important. Don't try to get, it's important to know what people think about things, but you need to have a detailed description of what you analyze. So that's really important. And it's good to create short quotes. Don't create new text. Try to keep this short and try to understand what's going on in the data and preserve activities and actions in the data for analysis. And then you compare different parts of the data. And it's good to try different approaches and ways to analyze. By that, I mean, using more focus on the language, how do people speak, or more focus on actions, or more focus on meaning. So to try to approach the data in different ways. So mainly people talk about two methods in coding. It's called open coding and focus coding. There is a third method that has been specially developed within grounded theory. It's called axial coding. But this kind of coding has been criticized for being too complex and cumbersome, and that it introduces unnecessary layer of complexity. So it is often cited in research methods chapters, but I suspect it's not always used. And for example, Kathy Chalmers, her book is on the list of books at the end of the slideshow. She does not recommend, for example, this. So I just wanted to mention it so you knew that it does exist, and I'm not going to go into it, but yeah, you can read about it different places. So what is open coding? Sometimes it's talked about like word by word analysis or line by line analysis. It means that you go carefully through every line and you read every word. And at the outset, it's really important to be detailed. So what is there? Many people start by underlining or coloring and write on the margins, concepts or insights. And so it's good to break the data into parts so that you can keep separate parts you analyze. This is shown visually in some methodology books. So among the things you look for is what is assumed and taken for granted by the people or by the documents you are analyzing and is not talked about or not written about. So it's important to think about, so what is taken for granted? What is behind this way of talking that is not said but is there, or is not written but is there? And look for what is the different meaning people attach to different actions or activities or events. Because qualitative research is so insightful, and you look for what do these mean, what do these different things mean for the participants. And the reason for that is that the theoretical foundation of qualitative research is sort of interpretive or constructivist sociology theories, which say that you act based on what things mean to you. So the way people understand and what meaning they attach to things really directs what they do about them. So looking for what things mean for the participant is important. And also, the importance or significance of particular issues or events or actions or experiences for people. Sometimes people have very profound experience that really changes the way things, what things mean. I sometimes use the example of the financial crisis in 2008. There was an international financial crisis. It was a big bank crisis in Iceland. Before the crisis, there were people, businessmen in Iceland who owned a couple of the big banks. They were at some point seen as modern day Vikings because they went sort of and bought banks and warehouses and stores and boutique chains in different countries. So they were really praised as like these pioneers, these moguls, money, making, really clever money-making guys, clever businessmen, and they were admired by many. After the collapse, they became criminals. These were exactly the same men, but, their actions took on a totally different meaning. And many of them have been sentenced to sit in, to be, incarcerated in jail. So, things can, even the things that, all kinds of things can change their meaning also. And so compare parts of the data. So what does this person say from this perspective? How does that compare to, what someone else says? So look at the different perspectives and parts of the data. And then, where are the gaps? And when you are doing analysis during data collection, you can fill, try to fill these gaps that you identify. So this is open. You look at everything and you try to find what is there. If you start this with 1,000 pages, that is really difficult. So now you see, it's really important to start early. So but you have to start. The only way to do the analysis is to do the analysis, is to begin by reading the data, marking it, sorting. And then, when you come a bit further, you do focused coding. Then you take the most important, most common, most interesting, most frequent, codes from the open coding. You take one code, and now you go systematically through all the data, only with this particular code in mind, or issue or event. And look for it. Where is it? What does it mean for different participants? Is it also in this interview or that interview or whatever? So it's different. This really is where you sort of go into depth in the coding, when you do the systematic looking for particular issues in the data or insights. So it's important. You see through the focused coding where you have the most data on, and the best understanding of what's going on in the data. So this is how you sort of, repeat going through the data with different focused coding in mind. So, yeah, and remember to write about what you are analyzing. So that's where the analytic memos come into place. These are considered a really crucial method in grounded theory and in most analysis, because this writing memos encourages you to analyze your data and write about your codes early in the research. And this is really liberating because nobody but you will see it. You can write whatever comes to mind, and it really helps you develop your insights. If it turns out to be crap, you can just throw it out. Most often, it turns out to be a really important way of beginning to understand and formulate insights and understandings and issues that are in the data. So writing memos is a really crucial middle step between the data and the data collection and the coding and writing drafts of the paper. So based on your coding, you write a memo that will become a part of a draft of a paper. It is sort of a middle step that allows you to think freely and, be daring about what you are seeing in the data, the analysis and the ideas you are developing from the data. And based on the codes in various different ways. Sometimes people can write chapters and use coding categories as headings. So the memo is a way to catch your thoughts, record them, and your insights and your comprehension, and the comparison you make, and it crystallizes often the questions and directions to pursue. So it's a really essential part to write. You can call them whatever you like, and but writing about your analysis right from the start is crucial. That is what moves you forward fastest. So Mark talked about different types of sort of text in qualitative research. The memos are sort of the reflective parts or the analysis part, not the description. It's the descriptive part you base your analysis on. The memo is a part of the analysis. And you can write about, some people talk about two types of memos. You can write about particular events, particular concept, particular theme, particular places or people or participants. And then some people talk about the advanced memos, where you connect these different parts of the data and try to figure out how they hang together. And some people also talk about the third one. They call it the reflective or memos, where you reflect on sort of more personally on what you're seeing and how that relates to who you are and who you know in relation to your data. So Okay, I think we should have a break now, and then I'm going to continue talking about coding categories and sort of interpreting data, so more about, how you do the analysis. But I wanted to put the issue of memos in the middle of this discussion, because this has to be in the middle of or central in your analysis. So should we have some comments now? Okay, I'll have to try to find you guys again here. Okay, here you are. So please, questions or comments? Han?
Thank you, Raed. I have a question about, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. I have a question about initial coding, because I think you mentioned in your initial coding with the two method that was recommended by Casey in her book. So I'm wondering if you can discuss more about the third method that she mentioned, called incident by incident coding. And another question related to this is that, for example, if someone not really like doing doing line by line coding is not really convenient for the researcher, would you recommend other ways to do the initial coding? Thanks.
No, I really do. I mean, there is no, I think, way around doing initial line by line coding. I don't think so, at least in the beginning. You may be able to just do focused coding later on, and you may not maybe need to do line by line coding with each interview if you have a lot of interviews. When you think you have gained enough insights to do, the focused coding, then you should do that. But, incident by incident is more like focused coding. Then you just, it's just a way of sort of sorting and breaking up. So you code particular parts of the data, and then another part, and then another part, and then the challenge is to connect them. How do these relate to each other? What is relevant for my study? Where should I keep focusing? Or what is not really relevant? Or what do I not think is interesting or helpful and I can just skip? Because like I'm going to emphasize later on, is that, in order to write about your data with good insight, knowledge, and understanding, you have to have much more data than exactly what you write about. But all the other data that some people say is sort of unnecessary or sort of not, whatever. That is not how I see it. It's just like a documentary. If you're going to do a good 50-minute documentary, you have to have 300 hours or 1,000 hours of footage in order to put together a good documentary that really provides insights and understanding. It's exactly the same with qualitative research. You have to have lots of detailed data in order to write sensibly about the things that you select to write about. The extra data is what gives you the possibility to write with good sense and knowledge and insight about your data. You can never fit everything in what you write, but it's the basis for your understanding in order to do a good presentation of the findings.
Thank you. Can I just ask one follow-up question? Sorry. So by with line by line coding, does it mean that I have to like put a code on every sentence I read, or it just mean that I read the data I have line by line and code whenever I feel appropriate?
Yeah, you underline what you think is interesting, or might be of interest. And you try to catch right at the beginning where people repeat themselves, or if the same phrase or the same issue comes up across interviews. No, you don't have to quote every line. It's just you have to read all of it, with good attention, so that you can catch what is of interest to quote. And you read your data in the beginning, and then when you reread it, you will see other things. You will see new things.
I see. Thank you.
Yep. Lisa or George?
George, you go first.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Ranvik, for this presentation. I just have a quick question, and that relates with, in my case, I'm doing interviews in Portuguese, and I'll have to use that data in English, though. So my question is, at which point do I start to code? Do I do it with transcripts in Portuguese, or after I have translated all the transcripts?
Okay, I would quote the original language, because lots of things can get lost or misinterpreted or misunderstood in translation. And then, that means that I can't see why you have to translate all your data or your interviews. I don't think that makes sense. I think you should work with it in the original language and only translate what needs to be translated, such as when you quote your data, in the text, in the final text, where you write your findings, and then you, in your methodology chapter or in the article you publish, you just explain that this data was collected in Portuguese and that you have translated the quotes. But it just introduces too many problems to translate it into another language and then analyze it. Stay close to the data, the original meaning, because things can have a context and meaning in one language that is really hard to translate.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you for this part of the presentation again, Ranvik. And you just mentioned about staying close to the data. What does that mean in terms of transcribing interviews or focus groups? Does it mean that the researcher should always transcribe that himself or herself, or is it fine to use software or transcription services? Does that make you further, more far away from the data, or is that appropriate since it's time saving?
Well, I would say that for beginners, it's really important to transcribe some of the first interviews, just to get the feel of, how important that is. But then later on, I think it's fine to have others transcribe, because in qualitative research, unlike quantitative, it's very hard to get other people to do anything. When people do these statistical analysis, they get a lot of help with questionnaires and figuring out of the statistics. But you cannot do that in qualitative research. You can get support in sort of how you do it, but you have to do it yourself, all of it. You have to analyze your own data. It's very hard for other people to analyze it. The only thing you can farm out, which is very labor intensive, is the transcription. But when you get others to transcribe, it's really important that you listen to the interview and go through the transcript and correct, because you were there, and sometimes it's hard for people to transcribe correctly. And it has been studied how many wrong words are often transcribed in each interview, so that can happen, or does happen frequently. So you have to go through the transcript, listen to the interview again, go through the transcript that others have done, and then, you know, make sure that it's all there, it's correctly, transcribed, and that you put your own observer comments in. The one I talked to earlier, I think it was with Maria, you know, that your reflections go in there and that you write your analysis or reflection at the end about the interview, but definitely let other people transcribe. It's also very hard manual labor, that very difficult for many people. So yeah, but do some of the transcripts just to get the feel for it.
Thank you.
Marissa.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi. Oh, you can't see me. I was just wanted to comment. Yeah, I think that's what I'm going to do for me, at least, is to go through the transcription by myself. I'm actually choosing to do that really closely and then later have a transcription service. Now, I am working in Ireland and they are speaking what is my native language, English, but I find that there's a transcription service that has people that specialize in those accents, because I'm curious to see what they miss out on. For example, during my pilot, someone said that in the past, having a mobile during end of life was really important. And I wrote down, okay, mobile, because I understood that to mean cell phone. When later I asked for clarification to make sure I understood, I realized, or I was told, that meant caravan in Ireland. So I think like little things like that are really important and really fascinating. And I think it's a good idea to go through it and kind of, as I think Lisa said, kind of intimately know the transcript kind of with your heart and then kind of go back later. So that's what I'm doing, at least.
Well, this also, it's basically the same issue as with yours. So, like, you know, it's very hard. I mean, some things are just in the context and language. So it's important to know that, stay close to that.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not sure if there are more questions. Doesn't seem so. So is it okay that we continue through the next segment, or do people want a short break again?
Continuing on is fine by me.
Okay, if I don't hear lots of protest, I'll just continue. So what are codes? How do you make codes? What are coding? There are often also talked about categories of codes. And I'm going to describe some of these. You know, you can think about coding categories or codes that have to do with the place or the context. It can be the sort of physical place, like, you know, what are the courtrooms like? You know, what is the, school building like? What is the maternity ward like? You know, what happens in the context of, or it can be the social context, sort of or the historical context that you look to identify and code and make sort of coding categories. And if you have complex coding category, you can have subcategories. Then you can also think about coding as definitions and understandings of lives, people's lives, or positions or situations or conditions people are in. You know, so and also you can code participants' perspectives and understanding and sort of the diversity of perspectives that can come up. So, people have a particular perspective and understanding of, like, what is violence, and you can quote, you know, anything that has to do with violence, different views and understandings of it, how it's understood in the courts, how it's identified on an international basis, how it's, you know, understood in, you know, by women who have been abused, you know, and how has understanding of violence developed and changed over time. I mean, so like you want to understand this, how violence appears in your data. And then, you know, there are many ways that you can look for it, and from different participants in different documents and stuff like that, things like that. And also how participants think about people or things or places and relationships, you know, people's rights or various phenomena. So, you know, it can be any really issues that you identify that you would like to code. And processes, you know, the process of growing up, the process of how understanding of disability has developed, how historically courts have, you know, developed their understanding of disability, or how we have developed our understanding of, you know, fetal screening, you know, all kinds of things like that, that, you know, you can be looking for and you code in the data. And then there are different activities and actions, like it can be legislations, or it can be demonstrations, or it can be, you know, whatever that you want to code, or if people have had an abortion, or if, you know, whatever. So, and products and outcomes that, you know, you can think about that might be appropriate for your study. And then a very interesting and important part is strategies, that you look at the ways people get something accomplished or try to get something accomplished. And not just people. I mean, a lot of documents are really aimed to accomplish something. And so, you know, what strategies do people use to make sure that they gain rights to certain, you know, services or whatever? So these strategies are really something to look for. And then the social networks and relationship that people have, you know, within a movement, between movements, you know, within their families, within, you know, whatever. So these are sort of example of coding categories. And yeah, and when you are doing the analysis, it's really important to keep certain things in mind. You know, consider the context. Now we know, for example, the context of COVID has influenced a lot, but there are all kinds of contexts that influence things, both physical context and historical context, or legal contexts, or whatever. So think about, you know, in what context did this happen, or was this said? And also, it can be important when you are looking at your data to think about, so who initiated or started either action or conversation, or did people speak about this, you know, on their own initiative, or did you have to ask them? And, you know, things like that. It can make a difference. It tells you sometimes, what is really important to people if they make sure that they bring it up in an interview or if a conversation like in focus groups also it can make a difference to look for that. And also, especially when you have co-researchers or you are doing participant observations, to think about, did you as a researcher influence what was going on in this place or at this time? Or also, did you as a disabled researcher, influence what was said? Like, does you as a person, disabled person, or a lawyer, or with this background, or that background, or from this country, or that country, does that really influence what people think they should say to you? Or, does it influence how comfortable they are saying things or whatever? So it's really important to think about, how you and who you are in context of the data when you are analyzing it. So, and who was there? And did other people influence this? Is this direct or indirect data? Is this directly what you observed or what was said to you or in an interview? Or is someone saying in an interview, my friend so-and-so, she did so-and-so. So is it indirect from, so that can make a difference. So it's important to do that. And then to be aware of that. And then where does the data come from? Is this the medical doctor that says da-da-da, or is this, a pregnant disabled woman who, where it can be really important to know where data comes from. Who published this document, is important. So it's important to think about that with all kinds of data. And also, you have to have in mind your preconceived notion. What do you bring to this? You are doing the analysis, so you bring all kinds of issues, experiences, ideas, and understandings, and to this data. So what is your preconceived notion, and is that influencing how you, well, it does influence how you analyze the data, but you should, keep an eye on yourself in relation to your research. That's really important. Okay, I'm just going to say a little more about coding and coding categories. I should have, this should have followed after the coding category slide, sorry about that. But in some studies, the codes and the coding categories are decided before the research begins. Some researchers begin with codes or coding categories or concepts that they are looking for in the data. Most often this is based on theories such as political theories, pedagogical theories. You are trying to analyze what kind of pedagogical upbringing is behind how children turn out. So you interview a lot of kids and you analyze how they're brought up, and you try to analyze, is that why they are engaging in risk behavior or whatever? So this is, or political theory. This is, I don't think this applies to any of you, but if it does, then it's good to be aware of that you are bringing category, coding, codes or coding categories to that. Yeah. I also wanted to say, again, that large or broad coding categories can have subcategories. And then in the methodology books, they identify two different kinds of books, codes. It's called in vivo codes. Vivo means live, And it means living words or living codes, meaning that these are words that come from the participants or are found in the data and the document. So you use terms or quotes that come from the participants and use them as coding categories. Or you construct codes like, you know, fear or happiness or whatever, even if the, you know, to describe what's going on. But these codes are codes that, or concepts that that you have constructed. So you don't need to go into details with this, but it's just good to know. So when you're going through the data, you know, ask questions of the data. So what are the people doing? You know, what are these bunch of doctors doing when they decide to use, you know, nipped screening to get to detect Down syndrome? So what are they doing, really? Are they saving money? Are they preventing harm? What are they doing, really? So, you know, so, and what do the people want to accomplish, you know, with what they do? And how exactly are the people doing this? And the strategies I mentioned before, it's really important to look at the strategies they use and how people talk about, define, and understand what's going on. People can find really good ways of conceptualizing things that are, you know, sound good and are really not that good, you know, but it's good to make sure that it sounds good. You know, we have seen that many times. So, and what do people in your data take for granted or as given? And, you know, what do I think is going on in the data? You know, it may be totally different from what the people say they're doing. So what do I think? And so what can I learn from this data? So just, you know, interrogate the data, ask the data. You should look for these things. And here comes very much what Mark was talking about. You know, there are different issues that can influence your analysis and your coding, and you need to be aware of these. You know, value judgments. You need to look at, so what is considered important by your participants or in the documents? And what kind of worldview or ideological position or understanding is, you know, behind what people say or what the documents express? And it's good to look at different theoretical or perspectives, different points of view. And your interpretation is really a part of the discussion about and with the data. You are really talking to the data and relating to the data. So think about, you know, what your discussion is leading to. And often it's good to have a theory to bring into light or to formulate and construct particular views and understanding of the data during the analysis. Like you will see different things through a critical disability studies lens than through, you know, some things that have not to do with disability studies. And you feminist theoretical perspectives will also bring to view particular things. So be aware of and use the theory that, the theory you use is basically provides you with a particular lens through which you look at the data. So this needs to be part of your holistic view of holistic thesis, like you describe your theories in the theory part, and then you use the theories during your analysis. And many times we come to our research with particular perceptions and understandings and ideas and even visions that we have for change or injustice or justice, whatever. You know, try to go beyond that. It is really important to understand those who see things differently from you. Really important. And don't let it block your view, what you think on beforehand. You know, this is like, keep an eye on yourself. You know, one more thing. So, okay, there is no one right way or one right method to analyze qualitative data. And, you know, beyond, you know, these practical issues of going through the data, reading and coding and writing, that everyone has to do that. But, you know, people can use the same data set or come to the same data set and find really different results. So people can be analyzing and interpreting and understanding them in different ways. And they are all equally valid because there is no one correct finding. There is no one truth that results from or is based on data analysis. There are certain perspectives, you know, certain insights and analysis that you can present that is quite valid. Another person can find different ways based on the same data. That is also valid, but takes a different view, uses different perspective, theoretical perspective, so on. And qualitative research methods are not standardized, so there are no, you know, quite set rules about the analysis, you know, but you have to be systematic and thorough, and, you know, you cannot go, you cannot skip that. But there are no really set rules. And, you know, people have found really creative ways of working with qualitative data. But I suggest you stick to, you know, the sort of more conventional ways before you start writing poetry from your data, but which is also possible. So, these variations of how you understand and interpret data has often to do with theoretical perspective, the goal of the research, and the goal of the analysis. And so, and the traditions or approach where the research is placed. Like, this is a life history research, or is this, you know, this is an ethnography. So you may have the same data, but the tradition you are using or working within, you know, guides you to look at particular things. So this is what I mentioned earlier. Rich and detailed and large amount of data is necessary for good qualitative research, but it's not sufficient. You have to analyze this data properly. You, as a researcher, you bring meaning to your data. That the data does not speak for itself. You have to analyze it alone, with your supervisor, with your co-researchers or what, but you have to have rich and a lot of data, detailed data for the analysis. And so one characteristic of good research is that more data has been collected than can be used when you write the findings. I mentioned this earlier with Han. And that you really do need all the data in order to write with confidence. That is also really important. What can I allow myself to read into this? How much can I really allow myself to state firmly, based on the data. And the more data you have that supports what you want to say about the data, the more confidence you have to write about or speak about your data. Also, if you want to write with elegance and insight and sound knowledge about the data, you have to have a lot of data to allow you to do that. So, okay, discussion. Okay, questions? Adriana.
Hi, thank you. I have two questions for you. The first one is about your recommendation for the referencing of interviews in our chapter, in our book. And I want to get your recommendation because at Maastricht University, we received a training as a short one, but it was about Atlas TI, which is one of the softwares that a researcher can use to organize the data. Of course, the software doesn't make the work for the researcher, but one of the reasons why the trainer recommended to use a software is because once you import every transcript into the software, the documents get or receive a unique number. And then the researcher can use that unique number for the referencing of the interviews. So he has strongly recommended to do it as a good practice. But in case if we don't use a software, what would be your recommendation in that regard? And the second question, sorry.
I didn't understand the question. What do you mean by referencing?
How you quote? I mean, if you are using quotations in your work,
Yes.
what is your, how do you reference that, the interview?
Yeah, how do they recommend your reference? What is it, like numbers of, or what?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because the software organizes the documents and once the transcripts are imported in the software, then and then it is also used for transparency purposes. I mean, your data can be retrieved by another researcher. So it was kind of that issue. And then I was listening to you that maybe if it is not a good idea to use a software, how else should we reference our interviews?
Yeah, now I understand the question. Well, I do not agree with this kind of referencing. I mean, mostly we want to keep the privacy of the people, their anonymity, and we do not want to have a direct link to their interviews, and because that's a very easy way to identify the people. So I never would recommend this at all. What I recommend is that you describe your participants like saying, well, I talked to 3 kinds of participants. I'm just making this up. Like a set of lawyers, a set of and some, and you describe them saying that they are from diverse ethical background, education. You describe them in general terms, and then you say that one of the more seasoned lawyers said, and you quote him, and you don't need a reference. And it is very rare that other people go through your data, but you should keep your data so that you can prove that you didn't make it up. I mean, we have seen theses, rarely, but they have existed that have been totally made up. Really, really good theses, but totally fabricated. But I do not think it's a good idea to have a direct reference with numbers of lines and numbers of interviews. I don't think that's helpful. It tells no one nothing. It just is a number that people say, oh, where does this come from? You do not need the same reference as you do with quoting books and published authors, then you need, to say where it comes from and what page it's on. But with it's totally different with quoting participants.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And my second question is about, do you recommend us to include our code book as an annex in our work, in our book, in the case when we have to submit a book, a final book?
No, I don't think that's necessary. And I have not seen people do that. People sometimes include their interview guide, but you don't need to. You just describe how you did code and how you did your analysis. But you don't need to, because also these coding categories, maybe you never use like 5 of them and mostly use, the other 7 or whatever. So it doesn't tell people very much. The findings is what is telling.
Okay, thank you.
Eleona.
Hi, I don't have a question. I just wanted to give Adriana my perspective of how I'm doing it, because I think what I understood from your question, Adriana, was that if, for example, for your draft, when you're writing an article or a report or whatever you're doing, you want to remember which participant you quoted, you can put in brackets the number. The way I have done it is I have files in my computer, and each interview has a number next to them in the order I did them. So just to make things clear, I just say, okay, participant 2 or interview 2. And I know who that person is because I have it in my folder of data collection. So maybe that's something might be useful to you. Am I making sense, or am I clear?
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Ellie.
And then you can delete those things. And or Anvik, you can feed into this, but in the Daphne reports, they had in brackets participant 2, participant 5. And that's one way to just make sure that you remember who you're quoting yourself, rather than giving away to the reader who that person may be. Hope that's useful.
Yep, fine. Thank you, Eleona. So yeah, it's good to keep track of where your quote comes from when you're in your draft. That's a good point. So it's 11. I have still a few slides. Would people like to continue for about 30 minutes?
I don't mind continuing. That's fine with me, personally.
Okay, so those who want to continue, continue. Should we take a break, or do we just go through?
I think maybe a 5-minute break from Vic, just to give everybody a stretch.
Yeah, that's fine. Let's take 5 minutes. We start then like 9-10 minutes past, and finish up the rest.
Okay, perfect.
Excelentos.